Committee on Homeland Security, Subcommittee on Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Protection will come to order. Without objection, the chair may recess at any point. The purposes of this hearing is to receive testimony from two federal cyber leaders on the state of federal cybersecurity governance. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Thank you to our witnesses for being here to continue our subcommittee's discussion on a very important topic, federal cybersecurity. Last month, we hosted industry leaders to give their perspectives on the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency's, or CISA's, federal cybersecurity programs, specifically the Continuous Diagnostics Mitigation, CDM program, and the National Cybersecurity Protection System, or NCPS. I'm eager to hear directly from CISA and the Office of National Cyber Director, or ONCD, today on their views on those programs and the state of federal cybersecurity efforts and governance more broadly. As the operational lead for and administrator of federal cybersecurity requirements, CISA has a broad and important role in ensuring the security of federal networks. As I said in the previous hearing, whether CISA acts as a service provider or an advisor toward other agencies is a fundamental question, and Congress and CISA must both be consistent in how they approach it. As one of the executive branch's newest cyber roles, ONCD is tasked with leading national cybersecurity policy and strategy. ONCD's implementation of the National Cybersecurity Strategy will be a key test of its role in federal cybersecurity governance. In our last hearing, there were several common themes I hope to further explore with Mr. Goldstein and Mr. DeRusha this afternoon. We learned that CISA must modernize by considering new technologies so programs like CDM evolve with the changing threat landscape. The federal government as a whole must adapt to defend against elusive threat actor tactics like new living off the land techniques seen in the recent Volt Typhoon activity. We also briefly dove into the breakdown of CISA's budget, with almost one-third of its fiscal 2024 budget requests allocated in strengthening federal cyber networks. It's important to further discuss how CISA measures the success of programs like CDM and reforms its legacy programs like Einstein. Finally, I hope to discuss the administration's plans to raise the level of federal cybersecurity resilience across the board with both our witnesses. Each relevant committee of jurisdiction in Congress must understand ONCD and the Office of Management and Budgets, or OMB's, plan to ensure the federal agency funding proposals are aligned with activities in the National Cybersecurity Strategy. Again, thank you to both our witnesses for being here. I look forward to your testimony and discussing these questions in greater depth. I now recognize the ranking member, my friend from California, the gentleman, Mr. Swalwell, for his opening statement.
Great. Thank the chairman for holding this important hearing and also keeping it. And I told the witnesses before the chairman came, no one would have blamed him, considering the events of today, if he had just canceled this, but out of respect to you and your already being here, he wanted to make sure we got this done, and I appreciate that. Federal agency networks house our most important and sensitive information, and it's no surprise that adversaries like Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and others are routinely trying to access them. And as global dynamics shift and technology evolves, we must continuously work to stay ahead of our adversaries. The good news is we have made tremendous progress in recent years. The federal government is now in the position to both lead by example and transform how vendors and consumers approach security. President Biden's Executive Order 14028 finally set the federal government on the path toward adopting modern cybersecurity best practices, including the implementation of zero-trust architectures, improving software supply chain security, and the deployment of endpoint detection and response technology. By setting new security standards for the federal government, we will drive security improvements throughout the marketplace that mean better security for everyone. For its part, Congress has empowered agencies across government to better execute their network security missions. Nearly 3 years ago, Congress authorized the Office of the National Cyber Director to develop and implement a national cyber strategy and to ensure that agency budgets are consistent with the goals of this strategy. Additionally, Congress has expanded CISA's authorities beyond issuing binding operational directives and emergency directives to include persistent hunting authorities. With additional resources from Congress, CISA and federal agencies have moved the Continuous Diagnostic and Mitigation Program forward, bringing to fruition bringing to fruition longstanding goals of increased visibility into agency networks, enabling better detection and response to cyber incidents. I look forward today to hearing more from our witnesses on how these investments and initiatives have achieved tangible results. The bad news is we cannot wait for another attack to spring into action. Our adversaries are constantly evolving their capabilities, and new technologies are posing both challenges and opportunities. Emerging technologies like AI and quantum computing will continue to transform the cyber capabilities of our adversaries and the ability to defend our networks. The ongoing migration to cloud computing has also shifted how we approach cybersecurity. To combat these risks, we must continue to modernize our networks and cyber defenses. The National Cybersecurity Strategy and the subsequent implementation plan lay out an impressive vision for how to approach cybersecurity for the threats of tomorrow. And under Director Easterly's leadership, CISA has continued to look forward, including the proposed cyber analytics and data system to improve CISA's ability to process and analyze its vast amount of cybersecurity data. I hope to hear today more about CISA's plans for cyber data analytics and continuous diagnostics and monitoring going forward, and how OMB and ONCD will help coordinate the improvement of federal network security across the federal civilian executive branch. Finally, I want to emphasize the importance of continued support for CISA and its mission. The programs we discussed today are essential to our national security, and the progress we have made by standing up and resourcing CISA have been the result of bipartisan cooperation in this committee and throughout the Congress. Unfortunately, last month, half of the Republican conference, including the chairman of our committee and the newly elected speaker, voted to cut CISA's budget by 25%. Such a cut would devastate CISA's ability to operate key programs to detect and respond to cyber incidents across the federal civilian executive branch, leaving us more vulnerable to espionage and destructive attacks from our adversaries like Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. At a time when there are conflicts in multiple parts of the world, I cannot comprehend how we would do anything to reduce our ability to defend against cyber attacks. Again, I appreciate my colleague, Chairman Garbarino, his outspoken support for CISA, and I hope that today's hearing will build awareness in Congress about the importance of sustained investments in cybersecurity. Thank the witnesses for being here, and yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranking Member Swalwell. And it was the chair of the full committee, not me.
Sorry, I the chairman of the full committee. Yes, if I wasn't clear.
But I think a majority of the conference did vote to support CISA, and we're going to make sure our colleagues continue to be educated on what a great agency CISA is. So, other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. I'm pleased to have two witnesses before us today to discuss this very important topic. I ask that our witnesses please rise and raise their right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give before the Committee on Homeland Security of the United States House of Representatives will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? All right, let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Thank you, and please be seated. I would now like to formally introduce our witnesses. Eric Goldstein serves as the Executive Assistant Director of CISA's Cybersecurity Division. In this role, he leads CISA's mission to strengthen federal networks against cyber threats. Prior to his time at CISA, Mr. Goldstein was the global head of cybersecurity policy, strategy, and regulation at Goldman Sachs. He also served at CISA's precursor agency, the National Protection and Programs Directorate. Chris DeRusha serves in a unique dual-hatted role as Federal Chief Information Security Officer, or CISO, at OMB, and as Deputy National Cyber Director for Federal Cyber at ONCD. Ms. DeRusha has experience managing cybersecurity programs in both the public and private sectors, including as the Chief Security Officer for the state of Michigan, the lead of vulnerability management at Ford Motor Company, and in multiple roles at OMB and DHS. Thank you both for being here today. Mr. Goldstein, I now recognize you for 5 minutes to summarize your opening statement.
Thank you. Chairman Garbarino, Ranking Member Swalwell, members of the subcommittee, it is a privilege to rejoin you again to talk about the criticality of CISA's federal cybersecurity mission and the challenges that we face going forward. As the ranking member noted, every American depends every day on services provided by 102 federal civilian agencies, And our adversaries recognize this criticality as well, attempted to execute damaging intrusions against our federal agencies every single day. In this environment, CISA serves a critical role as the operational lead for federal cybersecurity. And it bears noting that nearly 3 years ago, we were collectively engaged in responding to an intrusion campaign undertaken by Russian intelligence targeting federal agencies. And on the back of that intrusion campaign, we recognized collectively areas for improvement in resources, authorities, centralization, and accountability. And we've made real progress over the past several years in advancing both CISA's role and in partnership with entities like OMB and ONCD, raising the collective bar across the federal enterprise. Now, CISA has 3 key roles as we execute our role as the operational lead for federal cybersecurity. First, we provide a common baseline of security across those 102 federal civilian agencies. We issue directives that drive requirements and prioritization to address the most urgent risk, and through our CDM program, we provide a common baseline of visibility across every agency. Second, we use our increasing visibility to drive urgent response to those vulnerabilities and threats that pose urgent risk to agencies so that they can be addressed ideally before harm occurs. And third, we work with each individual agency to assess their gaps and provide shared services and direct support as needed to ensure that we are raising the baseline across every agency, particularly those that might need the most help. Now, with the support of Congress and this committee, we've made some remarkable improvements over the past few years. A few years ago, our visibility into risks facing the federal enterprise were limited. Today, we can see real-time data on vulnerability, other exploitable conditions, and threats across millions of federal IT assets across every federal civilian agency. And as the ranking member noted, we can persistently hunt for threats and vulnerabilities nearly automatically in real time, so that when there is a new, what we'd call a zero-day vulnerability, we don't need to ask agencies to send us a spreadsheet. We can look in the CDM system, we can undertake persistent hunts, and we can figure out quickly what's going on and how do we need to drive change. Now, core to this visibility is our CDM program, which has become the default approach across the federal enterprise to get that centralized visibility into risks and drive urgent change. And as the CDM program has matured and grown, we need to ensure a sustainable funding approach where this program can maintain the gains that we've achieved while modernizing for the future. A few years ago, we didn't have the ability or the roadmap to integrate disparate data from across government and the private sector. Today, we are urgently building the Cyber Analytics and Data System, or CADS, which is a modern, scalable environment where we can bring data from CDM, from threat hunting, from the private sector, and use it to identify risks that previously would have been invisible to us. And finally, a few years ago, most agencies were on their own in providing these cybersecurity solutions that they need to address threats. Today, we are deploying scalable, cost-effective shared services, such as our protective domain name system resolver, which has blocked 330 million connections to malicious domains, our vulnerability disclosure platform that has enabled remediation of over 1,500 vulnerabilities in federal websites, and we continue to expand our portfolio in this area, including through our attack surface management program that's going to provide unprecedented visibility into internet-exposed risks across the federal enterprise. But all that being said, we know that we're on a midpoint in our journey. Working with our fellow agencies, with OMB and ONCD and the private sector, we are going to keep advancing and maturing to keep pace with the adversary, and we look forward to continued support of Congress so we can sustain the progress we've made and make sure that we are modernizing in a way that creates the security environment that Americans expect of their federal government. Thank you again for the privilege of being here, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Goldstein. It always impresses me how you can memorize that entire statement. Sometimes I have to look at my own name before I say it out loud. Yeah, thank you. Mr. DeRusha, I now recognize you for 5 minutes to summarize your opening statement.
Well, thank you. Chairman Garbarino, Ranking Member Swalwell, and members of the subcommittee. Really appreciate you holding this important hearing today to discuss federal cybersecurity governance. You know, I'm always pleased to testify in front of you with my good friend and colleague, Eric Goldstein from CISA, and we look forward to updating you on the progress we're making on governance efforts. In particular, where we've made good strides in implementing Executive Order 14028, which we colloquially refer to as the Cyber EO, OMB's Zero Trust strategy for the federal civilian government, and then the President's recently released National Cybersecurity Strategy. As was mentioned, I am both the Federal Chief Information Security Officer and Deputy National Cyber Director in ONCD. And in both of these roles, I'm focused on ensuring that the federal enterprise is taking a holistic view and approach to confronting threats. We often refer to this as collective defense. That unity of effort enables us to align this national cybersecurity strategy, which was developed by Office of National Cyber Director and issued by the President, with the policy guidance that's coming from OMB and all the operational assistance and programs just outlined by Eric from CISA. And it's all in the name of ensuring that departments and agencies have the direction, the resources, the information, but most importantly, the support that they need to be able to protect federal systems and data. And I'll tell you, we're making meaningful progress towards achieving our goals of collective defense. And honestly, the importance of strong governance to that end cannot be overstated. So in May of 2021, President Biden's executive order 14028 set us on a path to aggressively and ambitiously shift our mindset to one that is very clear-eyed about our adversaries' capabilities and intent. Over the last 2 years, the evidence is clear. The federal enterprise is better defended when we employ modern zero trust architecture and principles. Agencies are implementing higher levels of encryption and leveraging common tool sets that establish vigilance within our federal systems. We've also seen deployment of phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication as a proven way to combat an adversary's ability to gain a foothold in any system. We must continue to aggressively invest in making our systems more defensible by employing widely accepted zero trust principles to better detect and contain our adversaries who are seeking to disrupt us from achieving our goals. With the President's issuance of the National Cybersecurity Strategy in March of this year, we're building on this progress by setting an affirmative vision for managing risk in the digital age. The strategy outlines 2 fundamental shifts to achieving that goal. First, we need to rebalance responsibility for managing cyber risk by expecting more of the most capable and best positioned actors. That includes the federal government, to make our digital ecosystem secure and resilient, rather than placing this burden on individuals, small businesses, local governments, and critical infrastructure operators who often do not have sufficient expertise and resources to do it on their own. Second, our economy and society must incentivize activity and make cyberspace more reliable over the long term. The strategy outlines how the federal government will use all available tools to reshape incentives and achieve unity of effort in a collaborative, equitable, and mutually beneficial manner. The federal government's taking a data-driven approach to measuring the investments and progress that we're making towards achieving the actions that are set out in the strategy. In July, we released a transparent roadmap to achieve these goals, the National Cybersecurity Strategy Implementation Plan. The plan details high-impact federal initiatives from protecting American jobs by combating cybercrime to building a skilled cyber workforce equipped to excel in our increasingly digital economy. Each initiative is assigned a responsible agency and has a timeline for completion. In fact, 18 agencies are leading initiatives, and ONCD is coordinating the activities of this whole government plan, which will include an annual report to the President and Congress on the status of implementation. To ensure funding proposals are aligned to the President's budget request, ONCD and OMB have issued a joint cybersecurity priorities memo to inform the fiscal year 2025 budget bill. The federal government's ability to deliver services to the American people while providing the confidence that their data is protected is contingent upon a strong foundation of cybersecurity. The strategic path set by this administration is enhancing collective defense to ensure our federal systems are safe, secure, and resilient. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Dershowitz. Members will be recognized by order of seniority for their 5 minutes of questioning. An additional round of questioning may be called after all members have been recognized. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questioning. Mr. Goldstein, as I said in my opening statement, we gathered input from private sector witnesses in our last hearing evaluating CISA's flagship federal cybersecurity programs, the CDM program and the National Cybersecurity Protection System program. There are a few outstanding questions directly from our witnesses that I have about these programs specifically. I want to start with, how is CISA modernizing CDM to consider newer technologies like cloud-based services to complement legacy providers?
This is absolutely foundational to our success. We know that the traditional model where we focus on securing on-premises infrastructure and assets doesn't scale to meet how agencies actually use technology today or how adversaries are targeting us. And so even in fiscal year 2024, we are making significant investments in expanding CDM's visibility into mobile assets and cloud assets. And we work closely with industry, both through, for example, industry days, requests for information, and going to, for example, events where industry is presenting on the latest technology to make sure that we are adapting those innovations into the program accordingly. Now, certainly where there are innovative companies that have solutions that can help the federal enterprise, we want to hear from them. And so my ask would be, if there are companies that are not part of the program today that think they have a solution that could help, to reach out to us, because we want to understand the state of the art and apply it quickly to our shared goals.
What's the best way to reach out to you?
So we have a vendor engagement. You can just go to the website and look at vendor engagement. We have a single portal where any vendor can reach out to CISA and be part of our programs.
And the response is pretty quick? And
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Now I have another one. How does CISA measure the success of its federal cyber programs, considering it spends almost 1/3 of its budget on strengthening FCB networks?
Yes, sir. We were really excited a few months ago to issue our first ever cyber strategic plan that for the first time actually had measures of effectiveness for security outcomes. And so we are really focused now on actually measuring very specific security outcomes. For example, the mean time to fix vulnerabilities, how many of what we call known exploited vulnerabilities are actually present on federal networks, how quickly can we detect intrusions. And so we are focused on measuring security outcomes that then we can show are a result of the investments that we're making on some of these measures, like mean time to reduce vulnerabilities. We're making a lot of progress. Other measures we know are more forward-leaning and will take more time to collect data to measure against.
Have the results been getting better?
They have been. I will offer one example for the known exploited vulnerabilities that are visible from the internet across federal networks. We have seen a 79% reduction over the past year based upon our attack surface management efforts and driving agencies to adhere to BOD 2201. And so we are seeing major progress in really key areas, but certainly more work to do.
I just want to ask this one also. Has CISA seen incidents on federal networks that could have been prevented through the use of technologies in CDM? Where was the disconnect?
Certainly, it is still the case that every organization experiences, malicious cyber activity, and there are certainly control gaps that may enable an intrusion to progress further than we would like it to. I think where we are today is we have the visibility that we need to identify conditions that adversaries can exploit, and we have the visibility we need in most cases to identify adversary activity. The work we are doing now is to make sure that we can drive action against that information. And so we know that, for example, there are still exploitable vulnerabilities across federal networks. The more that we can work with agencies to make sure that they also have the resources that they need to fix vulnerabilities and make sure that they have the right controls in place consistent with a zero trust strategy, that's going to help take us to the next level in our maturation.
Does CISA believe CDM could benefit from a true shared services model like Einstein?
We are absolutely looking at the right mix of delivery models across our portfolio. And so, of course, right now we do offer several services via a shared service model. For example, I mentioned our Productive DNS program. As we evaluate the next generation of technologies that will be delivered through CDM, we are absolutely going to be flexible in the delivery model that will add the most value at the best use of taxpayer dollars.
Thank you very much. Don't have time for another question. I'll probably get you in the second round. I now recognize Ranking Member Swalwell for 5 minutes for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Chairman. Earlier this month, the Federal Acquisition Regulatory Council, also known as FAR, issued a proposed rule requiring federal contractors to report cyber incidents on CISA within 8 hours of discovery. This timeline is not consistent with other federal cyber incident reporting mandates, including the 72-hour reporting timeline authorized in the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act, CIRCIA. As the proposed rule acknowledges, inconsistent reporting requirements can result in the regulatory community shifting focus away from security and toward compliance, which could ultimately jeopardize the security of federal networks. Mr. Goldstein, public comments for the FAR Council's proposed rule are due in December, as I understand it. The proposed rule for CIRCIA should be released in March. To what extent was CISA able to engage with the FAR Council in advance of the proposed rule released on October 3 to ensure that timelines and definitions are harmonized to the greatest extent possible?
Yes, sir. We engage significantly with the FAR Council, including our partners at ONB, in development of these proposed rules, and we very much look forward to understanding feedback from industry on the proposal. I will note, as a general matter, federal contractors are equally stewards of Americans' data, as are federal agencies, and it is absolutely of the utmost importance that we have significant visibility into cybersecurity incidents and risks affecting federal contractors. And just as we expect federal agencies to report incidents to CISA on an urgent timeframe, we certainly anticipate expecting similar requirements from federal contractors who we trust with so much of the work of the federal government.
Great. And Mr. DeRusha, how is the administration ensuring that any AI-related executive orders and policy guidance will support continued expansion of AI use for cyber defense?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So AI policy is a top topic for us at the White House right now, and the president will be issuing some executive action on that soon. In close follow to that will be a draft memorandum released by the Office of Management and Budget, which will talk about our proposal for government use and safe use of AI. I think the key thing here is we need to use this technology. We need, as you mentioned, for defensive purposes, and our adversaries are going to use it, so that would be one reason, but also to stay apace with where technology is moving and global economic competitiveness. And so I think you'll see very shortly from the administration proposal, which very much embraces the technology for all of its positive aspects, but also is going to propose some significant methods of finding safeguards and security throughout.
Thank you. And Mr. Goldstein, we are approaching a potential government shutdown on November 17. Can you lay out for me what would the effect be on CISA if there were a government shutdown? And then also, could you lay out for me what would the effect be on CISA if a 25% cut was actually imposed, as has been voted on in the past here in the House?
Yes, sir, absolutely. On the first question, a lapse in appropriation, while we will rigorously interpret our legal requirements in determining accepted personnel, our core operational functions will be able to remain functional, but all of our strategic or more systematic work to engage with agencies, to deploy technology, to advance technology, to the chairman's question, all of that work will be on hold. So we will be in a period of stasis where even as our adversaries evolve, we will not be able to advance our mission in the least, including in our critical interactions with federal agencies outside of urgent
So for
operations.
example, would JCDC meet in a government shutdown?
So the urgent work that JCDC does to manage imminent incidents and vulnerabilities would continue. The critical planning work and publication work that JCDC does would not.
Can you speak to the 25% cut?
Absolutely. A significant cut to our budget would be catastrophic. We would not be able to continue even sustaining some of the core functions across programs like CDM, like our shared services. Right now we are at the point where we have reasonable confidence in our visibility into risks facing federal agencies. We would not be able to sustain that visibility with that significant of a budget cut, and our adversaries would unequivocally exploit those gaps.
Great. Thanks. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize my friend from Florida, Mr. Jimenez, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you. And being that I've been in public service for a long time, let me tell you that I have never ever heard somebody in the bureaucracy tell me that a cut to their budget would not be catastrophic. So I didn't think you were going to say anything differently. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying I've never heard it. Yeah, we can sustain a 25% cut or a 5% cut or 2% cut or any kind of cut is always going to be catastrophic. And I always can tell you, being that I was ahead of bureaucracies, sometimes you can sustain some cuts if you look deep enough. And I'll let that go for now. All right, reduce vulnerabilities. What does that mean?
Yes, sir. So when a malicious actor, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, wants to break into a network, the way that they will usually do it is they will find a technology product that was designed in a way that they can run a piece of software on it and gain access. Most technology products at some point in time have these vulnerabilities. Technology is designed by humans. Humans make mistakes. A vulnerability is just a mistake in how a technology product was designed. And so if I'm the Chinese government, the first thing that I do to break into a federal network is I'm going to look at all the technology products I can see they're running. I'm going to find one that has a node mistake, and I'm going to use that mistake to gain access into the network. So what we do at CISA is we prioritize those products that have those mistakes that are most important, that are being used by the most severe adversaries. We then use our visibility to find them, and then we go out to agencies and say, you got to fix this right away, and then we can see when they do it. And if they don't do it, then we escalate to senior leadership of the agency to make sure that the problem is fixed before the adversary gets there.
Could I be as bold as say that reduced vulnerabilities goes beyond that or should go beyond that? It seems to me that whatever you do, how secure you think you're going to be, somebody's always going to crack you. Am I off on that? Somebody's always going to find a way, if they really want to get through the system. Is that true or not true?
So what I'd say, sir, is we know that many adversaries are opportunistic, and adversaries want to find a network to break into. If we can make the federal government and the agencies and systems we care most about as hard as possible, many agencies are going to shift their focus somewhere else.
All right, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't, but I'm also now maybe laying the predicate for something else, which is resiliency. So once a system is cracked and it's tied to some vital infrastructure, how do we make sure that that infrastructure, once we know that that system has been penetrated, that we somehow can decouple that infrastructure so that it continues to work?
Yes, sir. We couldn't agree more. This is foundational to the principles of zero trust that my co-witness mentioned. The idea behind zero trust is even if an adversary breaks into a system, they shouldn't be able to achieve an objective that harms the services upon which Americans depend. And so by making sure that we understand where the most important data and systems are, that we harden those systems specifically, to your point, sir, absolutely. If an adversary breaks into a network, that's bad, but the real harm we're trying to prevent is those most critical systems and making sure that those are maximally secure and resilient under all conditions. That absolutely is the core goal that we're trying to achieve.
And where do you think where are we on that? How far along are we on that?
So we have made tremendous progress. So we've made tremendous progress in identifying the systems that are most critical. As my co-witness noted, pursuant to the President's Cyber Executive Order, we have made significant progress in driving adoption of these zero trust security measures to reduce the likelihood of a truly damaging intrusion. Now, to your point, Congressman, adversaries invest significant time, significant money, and we know better than to say that security is perfect in any event, but certainly that is exactly our focus and where we are driving meaningful change.
And on infrastructure that's vital, let's say pipelines, et cetera, electricity and all that, have we worked on a way to decouple from technology, go back and have the redundancy of, say, backup systems, the old way of doing things, all manual? Yeah, it's not going to be as efficient, but at least they'll work. Have we tried to strengthen America in that way?
Yes, sir. We spend tremendous time outside of our federal cybersecurity mission working with the private sector and with the sector risk management agencies. I will note, for example, this country's major energy companies have really focused on what they call a black start, which is their ability to maintain resilience of some transmission and distribution under all conditions. Similarly, our major pipeline companies have invested significantly in being able to revert to manual operations, and that's useful for a cyber attack or for a natural disaster. And so certainly companies are investing in just that need, sir.
Thank you, and my time is up. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I now recognize Mr. Carter from Louisiana for 5 minutes of questioning.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. DeRussa and Mr. Goldstein, thank you both. Technology is moving fast. So the Technology Modernization Fund is helping federal agencies improve their cybersecurity. How effective has it been?
Yeah, Congressman, I am a board member on the TMF. I've found it to be extremely effective. We received $1 billion appropriation under the American Rescue Plan, and over the past couple of years, we've made over $600 million investments just targeted at cybersecurity alone. That's almost 30 different projects across 23 agencies where there's a significant portion of that project is focused on enhancing the security.
Given the nature of the threats that are out there with cybersecurity, if you had to sustain a 25%, a 10%, a 5% cut, wouldn't that decrease your ability to protect our cyberspace?
It would, and meaningfully so.
I'm mentioning it because my colleague said a moment ago that no one's ever said that they can sustain cuts. And I understand no one likes to have cuts, but in an area of cybersecurity, one of the major threats to the security of America, to talk about cutting those areas is very, very dangerous.
Congressman, it would simply mean we would manage less risk. So it's
Said differently, we would have more risk to
That's correct.
come at us.
That's correct.
Mr. Goldstein.
Yes, sir. Fully agree. As I mentioned, one of the critical areas of maturation for federal security is not just advancing CISA's resources and authorities in the years to come, but also making sure that federal agencies have the ability to deploy modern technology and infrastructure that is, in fact, securable. The TMF has been absolutely a critical resource in that regard, and certainly any cuts to it would set us dramatically back on the progress that we're trying to achieve.
And staying ahead of the bad actors who are moving at rapid pace. Not only are you maintaining, but you're constantly having to adjust as you find new threats that I imagine are coming on every single day.
Yeah, and Congressman, specific to the TMF, what's really helpful about it is if you have an incident, you need restoration, you need remediation immediately, those are funds, if you put the project forward, that you can get fairly fast. Or if you're working on a zero trust migration or modernization at your agency, maybe you can fast forward that by a year and a half by leveraging TMF funds. So, you are literally managing more exigent risk faster with the TMF as a resource.
Pay me now or pay me later. And the risk later is far, far, far greater in our national security. On one of the major shifts we've seen across the federal government has been increased cloud adoption, which has numerous benefits, but also require a shift in the approach to securing federal networks. Mr. DeRussa, how is the administration ensuring that federal cloud migration includes cloud native security?
Well, it's a top priority since EO 14028 and then strongly reinforced in the President's National Cyber Strategy. And this is what we're talking about, that those are the most resources, the most skill and capability, which in large part the cloud service providers all fall in that bucket. They really need to be ensuring that they're doing everything they can to protect their own platforms, their own resources. We may need to make sure that they're doing everything we would expect them to do. That is in part subject of the new cyber review board effort that we've taken on. And also, as they provision products and services to their customers, which often include federal agencies, we want to make sure that they're making it easy for their customers, that they're putting their configuration settings and giving that environment with the most secure settings in place. Not saying, here you can have the optionality to put security in place, but as default turned on. And that's been a big part of CISA's Secure by Design, Secure by Default, which are different things, efforts and push, which have are closely aligned between Office of National Cyber Director and CISA's implementation.
Thank you very much. Very quickly, I've just got about 53 seconds left. Mr. Goldstein, what is CISA doing to increase the use of cloud-native security solutions in the CDM program?
Yes, sir. So we are deeply focused on both ensuring that as we leverage CDM tools to gain visibility across agencies, we, for example, are deploying cloud security posture management or CSPM solutions as part of that approach. Separately from the CDM program, I mentioned that we are rolling out this calendar year our attack surface management program, which is going to give us extraordinary advances in our visibility of federal assets that are operating both on premises and in the cloud. I'll offer one more note, sir, which is working with individual agencies and our partners at OMB and ONCD to ensure that agencies are deploying the right security tools in their cloud infrastructure and that they are driving the cloud providers to make those tools on by default without added charge.
Would you agree, real quickly, would you agree that the bad actors out there could care less if we're Republicans or Democrats?
Of course, sir.
They want to attack Americans. They want to attack our industry. They want to attack our infrastructure. They don't care about what party battles we may be having. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So we have to make sure that we keep you fully funded, that you can defend us against those threats. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and I think I'd like to just say that I'm very proud that this entire subcommittee, both sides, bipartisanly, voted against those cuts in the appropriations bill. And I'd even go on to further say, Mr. Carter, that I think even a CR is not good for what we're doing here with cybersecurity. We have to do a fully funded appropriations package to make sure we keep up with technology, and I think the rest of all of our colleagues understand that. I think this is probably one of the most bipartisan committees in Congress. So with that, I now yield to my friend from Mississippi, Mr. Zell, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our nation's adversaries continue to find new ways to undermine our national security. We see this in the increased cyber attacks. For example, in 2020, Russian hackers altered a code in the software SolarWinds to compromise a secure data of several federal agencies and critical infrastructure providers. This attack was one of the most widespread hacking campaigns ever launched, from what I understand. And in 2021, the Biden administration released an executive order to improve the nation's cybersecurity. Since it has been 2.5 years since the executive order, I hope that agencies have made progress in implementing the requirements outlined. However, lately there have been some reports that National Security Advisor sent a memo to agencies reinforcing the need to follow these requirements. Mr. DeRussa, which requirements of the executive order are agencies finding the hardest to follow, and why is that?
Well, Congressman, as you highlight, Executive Order 14028 laid out a bunch of aggressive actions in removing barriers to information sharing, modernizing our cybersecurity practices. We talked about zero trust, improving software security supply chain. We've done a lot of work around that, and also ensuring that we are as prepared as we can possibly be for managing incidents as they will continue to occur. Look, we've taken an approach of having a large strategy, multi-year with the zero trust strategy, but we've also focused on a few areas like multi-factor and encryption. And traditionally implementing phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication has been hard for agencies, and there was a lot of work, but it is something that can really stop one of the most common types of attacks dead in its tracks. And so there has been lots of challenges around that. At times you could find that it's a contractor-operated system, and it's not in the contract that they have to have MFA, and it's more expensive, and they won't implement it. You can find workforce and capacity constraints around it, modernization challenges where the tech needs to be modernized before it can employ modern encryption and authentication. So I think those are some of the areas that we've been really focused on, but have also shown where there's lots of gaps and challenges across.
Thank you. Mr. Goldstein, what can CISA do to improve agencies' ability to follow these requirements?
Thank you, sir. There's a few areas. The first is, as I mentioned in my opening, we are focused on working with individual agencies through a team that we maintain called the Federal Enterprise Improvement Team. This was actually created with the help of Congress through the American Rescue Plan Act several years ago. And what this team does is actually deploys to federal civilian agencies, sits down with the chief security officer and his or her team, and walks through their gaps and actually helps them figure out how they can make progress. And so one way is just by providing that direct, almost consultative support to agencies to help them address constraints and progress on their journey. We are also evaluating additional tools, technologies, services that in the future might be able to help agencies on this journey, but I'll also just tie it back, sir, to Mr. Carter's point, which is one real constraint here is agencies using old technology. That actually isn't able to adapt to these modern security controls. The more that collectively we can invest not only in security, but also in modernization, that will smooth the path for adoption.
Well, thank you very much. And we're here to do as much as we can because we understand that I spent my entire life as a law enforcement officer, and this is new to me and to the country if you look at it. So we want to do everything we can to help you and work with this committee to get it done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize my friend, and happy he's here. He got a little late, but if you ever have the opportunity, he's a lovely singing voice. My friend from New Jersey, Mr. Menendez. I recognize him for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. And sometimes I do wonder why I show up for your committee. But it's a pleasure to see the witnesses and the ranking member, my friends across the aisle, my friends here, the staff, everyone except the chairman. Currently, the CDM program is designed to monitor IT assets across federal agencies. However, as technology evolves, risk of Internet of Things devices and operational technology continue to increase. And we must ensure federal network security programs reflect the current attack structure. Mr. Goldstein, how does CISA plan to ensure CDM can better monitor the full range of technology assets that pose a risk to federal agencies?
Yes, sir. We actually issued a binding operational directives a few months ago, binding operational directive 2301, that required agencies to conduct scanning of their assets at specific intervals and then provide automated results of those scans back to CISA. That directive specifically included IoT and OT assets for just that reason. Because we know, as articulated in the IC's annual threat assessment, that there are adversaries who seek not only to steal information, but to cause destructive impacts. If you seek destructive impacts, you are going to seek to compromise likely operational technology, and we need to drive risk reduction in that space as well. And so certainly as we continue to modernize and refresh technologies as part of CDM, we will make sure that the technology therein is capable of scanning for vulnerabilities in IoT and OT assets, but that is already a mandate for agencies to be doing today.
And do you have a status following the issuance of that directive in terms of how federal agencies have been responding?
Yes, sir. So at this point now, all CFO Act agencies, who are the largest agencies, are compliant and reporting automated data to CISA. There are several dozen other agencies who are also doing so, and we are working with the residual agencies to make sure that they have the technology and resources they need to do the scanning and reporting at the right intervals. But thus far, sir, agencies are meeting the timelines as prescribed in the directive.
Great, it's good to hear. In April, CISA released an updated version of its Zero Trust maturity model. This version is aligned with OMB's Zero Trust strategy, which seeks to bring federal agencies in line with Zero Trust security goals by the end of fiscal year 2024. Mr. DeRusha, with less than a year until that deadline, what is your assessment of the status of federal agency efforts to achieve OMB's Zero Trust security goals?
We have made a lot of progress. The key thing here, and you mentioned the capability maturity model, which we did align the strategy to, is that we have to make progress not in just one area. We have to make progress in identity management, in understanding where our sensitive data is, and tracking that in an automated way. Device management, network segmentation and applications, right? It's across all of that. And then below all of those pillars, we need to make sure that we have the appropriate governance in place. So we've seen investments in all of these things. We asked each agency for a specific implementation plan. In some instances, we set specific deadlines, and they've been meeting those. But we also gave some flexibility over that 3-year period for them to tell us sort of what order of events they wanted to achieve the actions that we laid out. And we do a lot of governance and oversight of that. We use our FISMA metrics to track progress as well. And so, we had the data to show as well that we're making meaningful progress. But it will also, to get to the optimal state of zero trust, take some time. I just want to be clear that that strategy was really an action plan to get onto this roadmap, and that we've got to move up that stack of capability maturity model with continued investment.
So you mentioned a lot of progress, meaningful progress. You also mentioned flexibility. Deadline is approaching. Do you think that they will meet the goals by the end of fiscal year 2024?
Yes, I believe we will meet the goals that we set out in that strategy by 2024. And in some instances, there will be opportunities for improvement, but I think it's, we're going to keep going, right? Like, there's going to be another iteration. But technology moves so fast. It's part of why we set the 3-year target. Like, we want to learn from these first 3 years. We've got communities of action. Agencies are learning from each other. We're going to take their input and feedback and then build that next level of the strategy.
And I would just encourage you to just keep moving as quickly as possible, because as you alluded to, the technology is quickly evolving, and so we can't rest on sort of the plans from a year ago, 3 years ago. We have to continuously be monitoring and implementing. But just one quick question for Mr. Goldstein before my time runs out. How's this supporting federal agencies as they seek to implement the zero trust maturity model?
Yes, sir. As my co-witness mentioned, we've created a zero trust community of practice where we have hundreds of participants across agencies who meet to discuss best practices, constraints, and the way ahead. And then additionally, through our federal enterprise improvement team, we provide agencies with direct support and guidance on their concrete issues. And then finally, it is also the case that there are aspects of the zero trust maturity model that can actually be addressed by CISA services. And so where that's the case, we certainly make sure that we are offering those services to any agency that requires it.
Thank you so much, Chairman.
Actually, would the gentleman of New Jersey yield for a song request?
My time is up.
Oh, that's too bad.
We can give you a couple minutes now. The gentleman yields back. I now recognize the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Lee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to return to the discussion of attack surface management. As we know, our sophisticated adversaries like Russia and China are constantly probing our nation's federal, state, and local critical infrastructure to try to identify vulnerabilities. And it's very important that we be able, our network defenders must be able to identify where those vulnerabilities are before they are exploited by those adversaries. So they need to be able to view that network attack surface through the eyes of the adversary and continuously evolve to be prepared to defend those internet-facing assets. As we've discussed today, Congress invested in an attack surface management program at CISA so that CISA can provide federal and non-federal stakeholders visibility into those vulnerabilities. And I'd like to hear an update from you about how that is working. We're hearing good things back, but we'd like to know more about how that's working, and where you see it going from here, how we can continue to expand that work.
Yes, ma'am. It's a great question. So, as you noted, there are going to be really 2 game-changing advances as we fully deploy our attack surface management capability. The first is getting better visibility into the assets across all of the entities whom we want to support, whether federal or non-federal. And the second is to increase the number of organizations participating in our visibility programs by several multiples. And so at this point, over the past year, we did a series of technology evaluations. We have obligated the resources that Congress so helpfully provided, and we are now at the point where we are rolling out this capability with the full rollout to be completed by the end of this calendar year. I will already say that the visibility that we gain through this capability has proven invaluable in many of the recent significant vulnerabilities that we've seen reported in the cybersecurity space. Already, our ability to understand prevalence and drive reduction has been absolutely critical. And so we think this is going to be a tremendous value both for our federal partners and for partners across the country.
And then going back to the chairman earlier talked about the subject, he asked questions about the subject of shared services. There too, I know this is a really important concept. It allows us to provide more services while also saving money because of those efficiencies. Is CISA at this point equipped from an administrative and a resource perspective to grow its shared services offerings for agencies? And second to that, do you envision a world where CISA might be actually taking on the security responsibilities for some of the smaller agencies?
Yes, ma'am. We have provided a series of extraordinarily impactful shared services across federal agencies. I mentioned protective DNS and vulnerability disclosure as being only two examples. We also take a disciplined approach to thinking through which security capabilities are appropriate for CISA to provide. Do they offer cost savings? Are they filling a gap that agencies aren't providing at scale? Is there benefit in CISA having some centralized visibility into the risks? I think vulnerability disclosure platforms is a great example where we are providing a service that is required by a binding operational directive, and CISA having visibility into the vulnerabilities that are being identified in federal websites then lets us drive broader improvements at scale. And so where we identify additional services that can be provided that meet those criteria, we absolutely have the authorities to do so and look forward to working with Congress to ensure that the resources match. To your second question, Congresswoman, it's a fantastic question. We know today that there are many agencies who are so small that they're equivalently small and medium businesses for their IT infrastructure and security function. Those are agencies that really need significant help. And so we are leaning forward with those agencies. For example, there's a designated CDM group where we provide almost CDM as a service with a cloud-based dashboard to help those agencies. But that certainly is a group that we are really focused on working with OMB and ONCD to understand where can we go next to make sure that as those agencies do provide critical functions, we can support them in their security journey.
And then the last thing, I'd like to go back to the topic of agency participation and agencies' voluntary participation, compliance, cooperation with CISA. I know that has been a challenge, and you all have been working very hard to bring them in and get them to provide the information and take the steps that CISA is recommending. What other things do you think you can do to be overcoming that challenge? And then, Mr. DeRusha, I'll also take that one to you on what OMB's role can be in ensuring that agencies cooperate with CISA and its efforts.
I would really say it's a new day in that area. I think Congress has provided really impactful authorities to help CISA, for example, conduct threat hunting without prior authorization. Executive Order 14028 required agencies to enter into memoranda of agreement with us to provide granular data through CDM, and then certainly funding from Congress that enabled us to deploy these EDR tools also really helped. But most importantly, we are now really showing reciprocal value to agencies, which ultimately is what matters most. And so, just this morning, actually, Chris and I spoke at a session with 30-some federal CISOs, including the CISOs from every large agency, and the goal was really to embark on a shared planning process together for fiscal 24 so that we are not imposing burdens on agencies. We are working together on a shared journey, and we think that is going to be the most important piece here. I would just add that a key part of that is, of course, CISA's funding profile and making sure that as we are offering services, those services are sustained. The last thing we want to do is get to a point where we have reasonable confidence in visibility and security measures and then have that be pulled back or degraded in a way that our adversaries, of course, will exploit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm out of time. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. We're going to start our second round of questions. I'm going to yield to myself for 5 minutes. DHS and CISA have the authority to require agencies to take certain actions through BODs and EDs. Mr. Goldstein, in your testimony, you discussed the known exploited vulnerabilities BOD and its successes in getting agencies to patch vulnerabilities. Mr. DeRusha, OMB and ONCD are responsible for overseeing agency compliance with such directives. How does OMB enforce compliance with these directives? What tools are at your disposal?
Yeah, so one of the tools we have are the Federal Information Security Modernization Act 2014 metrics that we jointly work with CISA, but they are OMB-driven metrics. And where we've put a lot of our emphasis are ensuring that we're both measuring agency performance and key EO 14028 goals, but also some of these directives. So, for example, you mentioned the CADs. We've got metrics in there that are measuring performance and of implementation of that binding operational directive. Also, for every BOD and binding operational directive and emergency directive, we work closely with CISA to ensure that we're getting all the data on agency implementation. Like, that is a full partnership. So we're employing our oversight and governance role there every day.
All right, thank you. A recent CSIS report says there is a role for CISA in advocating for cyber investments on behalf of FSEB agencies, but CISA's role is not necessarily to help agencies strategize their cyber budgets. Mr. Goldstein, I'll start with you. How can CISA best strike that balance?
Yes, sir. Our goal is really to understand, A, what is the appropriate baseline of security that every agency should adopt? What are the risk-based deviations from that baseline that agencies should adopt based upon their unique risk profile? Where can we help? And then where do agencies have to invest? And by working that process, we can then help agencies work with OMB, work with their CFO to advocate for these specific investments to meet the gaps that they see. And so certainly agencies remain accountable for managing their networks, remain accountable for their investments, but we can help them ask the right questions about where to focus.
Thank you. And Mr. DeRusha, where does OMB and ONCD fit into this, this equation in addition to the joint memos that you issue?
Yeah, well, it's a core role of both. And, again, with the dual hat role, what's great is that we're really doing that together as a team. And we analyze every agency's submission. We do data calls to ensure that those investments that they're proposing align to our priorities. And we actually can put and tag numbers now on zero trust investments because we're saying all the way from the capability down to the tool set, the service, the contracts being let, human resources being put behind it. We're mapping all of that to ensure that the money being requested is really being spent on the right thing. And then the second role is advocacy. The resource management officers in OMB have a tough job, especially in a year like this. They're trying to balance out a lot of priorities. And when we're working collectively using data, as I talked about before, just data-driven advocacy to ensure that cyber budgets remain high.
One more question. You both are responsible for two different aspects of the federal cybersecurity. CISA is the operational lead. For federal cybersecurity, OMB is responsible for overseeing compliance and requirements. So DeRusha, you now wear two hats between your OMB and ONCD role. A recent CSIS report entitled CISA's Evolving .gov Mission highlighted the concern that federal cyber governance organization and bureaucracy would negatively impact our cyber posture. Considering this, how do you distinguish between your two roles at OMB and ONCD? How much overlap is there between the two? And what is the benefit of having one single person fill both of these roles as opposed to consolidating into one entity?
Well, look, I think what a future confirmed National Cyber Director does, will be very important to answer that question. I'd say for the past 2 years, it's worked quite well. As you mentioned, ONCD was stood up and has some overlapping authorities with OMB. And the way we answered the question in the interim is we fused, and it has worked really good. And I would say has brought benefits that we really couldn't even anticipate at the time. I sit in the leadership meetings every day of both organizations and can kind of translate back and forth priorities, be a bridge between organizations just naturally, and also really understand everything that ONCD is doing to, implement the national strategy and get success across the nation internationally and bring those best practices, lessons learned into the OMB side. So, it's possible one day someone will say, hey, there's a better model, but, currently I don't see one. This is working pretty well.
Thank you very much. I had a second one for Mr. Goldstein, but I'm out of time, so I'll now yield to I'll send it to you so you can answer in writing.
I'll yield.
No, it's all good, it's good. I now yield to the ranking member, Mr. Swalwell, for 5 minutes for a second round.
Thanks. Mr. Goldstein, I had asked Mr. DeRusha about AI, and just wanted to give you the opportunity to answer, how does CISA plan to utilize AI to improve its cybersecurity defense?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Although we are, of course, focused on managing the risks of AI, particularly as it applies to federal agencies and critical infrastructure as a cybersecurity agency, we are also really bullish on the benefits that it can provide. And so we are certainly working within CISA and working with appropriate prudence, given the very valid security, trust, and safety risks that AI systems may have, to make sure that we are benefiting from that work as well. And so certainly as we developed advanced analytics to detect adversary activity, as we work to detect vulnerabilities more at scale, we will certainly be working to benefit from the latest advances in AI. In addition, we want to make sure that our operators, our analysts, can leverage AI tools so that they can do less of the work that machines can do and more of the work that only humans can do. And so we are urgently embarking on that road, even while doing it with all due prudence.
And Mr. DeRusha, this year's breach of multiple high-ranking government officials' emails highlighted that a single vulnerability in a software vendor could create risk across the federal enterprise. What are you doing to make sure that we're not overly reliant on a small number of software vendors? And what more can we do to ensure that one critical vulnerability in a single vendor's software does not create risk across the entire board of federal government networks?
Yeah, Congressman, so the way I would describe what you're laying out is concentration risk. It's something that we talk about quite often, and it's something we take very seriously. One direct action that we're taking, again, as I mentioned, the Cybersafety Review Board, of which both Eric and I are board members, we're taking this on, and we're going to really look at how back-end authentication and identity management practices are occurring at these large cloud service providers. That breach occurred at one, and there are many others. We're not going to single out. We're going to look at this as what it is. It is a broad risk held by many. And we're going to really ask hard questions of is there anything else that we need to be doing? Is there any other support that they need from us? And we're going to ensure that we interrogate that.
Great. I don't have any further questions. Again, I just want to thank you all for engaging with us. I agree with the chairman that a CR also is a nightmare, that you all need long-term certainty and planning, because the threat actors, they don't operate by CR. and they need us to be well thought out and prepared as we meet the threat environment. And I'll yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Yields back. I thank you all for your valuable testimony, especially on a dense topic like this. You made it very exciting. And for the members who have all left me for their questions. The members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we would ask witnesses to respond to these in writing pursuant to Committee Rule 7D. The hearing record will be open for 7 days. Without objection, this subcommittee stands adjourned.